A routine courtroom trial takes a shocking twist when the judge suddenly freezes, staring at the defendant. Why? Because it's his childhood best friend, someone he hasn't seen in 30 years. What he does next, no one saw coming. Astonished face balance scale collision before. Diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Stop the trial. The judge suddenly said. The courtroom fell silent. The clatter of papers stopped. Pens froze mid-scribble. Even the bailiff's hand stalled halfway to his holster. All eyes turned to Judge Michael Owens. He was standing, breath shallow, hands trembling slightly as they gripped the edge of the bench. The color had drained from his face, and his usually firm voice quivered. But his eyes were locked on one man. The defendant, a man accused of armed robbery and assault. A serious charge with a possible 15-year prison sentence. The evidence so far had been damning. Surveillance footage, witness testimony, a weapon found in his possession. He hadn't spoken much, just sat there quietly beside his public defender. But now, under the judge's intense gaze, the defendant slowly stood. "Your Honor," the prosecutor asked, confused and no answer. "Is everything all right, sir?" the defense attorney asked cautiously. Still, Judge Owens said nothing. He stepped down from the bench slowly, his eyes never leaving the man in the tan prison-issued shirt. Finally, he spoke, barely above a whisper. "Daryl?" The defendant blinked. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice scratchy, confused. "Daryl Jenkins," the judge said again, louder this time. "Is that you?" The man hesitated. "Yes, that's my name." Judge Owens shook his head in disbelief. I can't believe this. It's been over 30 years. "Daryl, it's me. Michael Owens." The courtroom gasped, murmurs rippled through the rows of spectators. The court reporter stopped typing. The prosecutor looked stunned. Even the jury, instructed to remain impartial, couldn't help but glance at one another in surprise. That Daryl's eyes widened. He took a step forward, then another. For a moment, the hard expression he'd worn for days melted away. "Mike?" he said, voice cracking. "Little Mike Owens from 5th Street. Judge Owens gave a shaky laugh. Yeah, that's me." A heavy silence hung in the air before Daryl added, "I thought you moved away." "I did. My mom got a job in another city when we were 13. I never came back. And now you're a judge. And you're—" Judge Owens looked down, the words catching in his throat. "You're the defendant." They stared at each other, decades of time crashing down between them like waves. The bailiff, unsure what to do, took a cautious step forward. "Your Honor, should I?" "No," Judge Owens said quickly, raising a hand. "No, this trial is on hold until further notice." "But, Your Honor," the prosecutor began to object. The judge turned to her, firm again. "I am declaring a temporary recess." "Bailiff, clear the courtroom." Though it was unorthodox, no one argued further. The room slowly emptied, buzzing with speculation. Only the judge, Daryl, and the bailiff remained. Once the doors closed, Judge Owens walked over to his old friend. "What happened, Daryl?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Daryl looked away. "Life happened, Mike. After you left, everything fell apart. My mom got sick. My dad was never around. I got caught up with the wrong people. I made bad choices. Some I regret. Others, I didn't have much choice. But this armed robbery, I didn't do it," Daryl said quickly. "I swear. I was there, yeah, but I didn't hold a gun. I didn't hurt anyone. I tried to stop it, actually. But nobody believes me." Judge Owens studied him, searching the face of the boy he once rode bikes with, played ball with, talked about dreams with. "You were the smartest kid I knew," Owens said. "You used to help me with math. You wanted to be an engineer." Daryl chuckled bitterly. "Yeah, well, life had other plans." A long pause. Then the judge spoke. "I can't change the law, but I can make sure you get a fair trial. That everything is reviewed properly. If you're innocent, we'll prove it. If you're not, well, you'll still get a chance to explain your side. I owe you that much. Not because we were friends, but because you're a human being who deserves justice." Daryl's eyes filled with tears. He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mike. No promises, Daryl, but I'll do what's right. For both of us." And with that, Judge Owens turned and walked out of the courtroom, back to his chambers, back to the weight of the law, and back to the burden of memory. But one thing was certain. This was no longer just another trial. This was a reckoning with the past. And maybe, just maybe, a chance for redemption. A friendship from the past. Michael and Daryl had grown up on the same street, Lincoln Avenue, in one of Chicago's roughest neighborhoods, in a place where gunshots were more common than fireworks. And kids often learned to run before they learned to read. Their friendship was something pure. They met when they were just 7 years old. Michael had fallen off his bike and scraped his knee. Daryl, a wiry kid with big eyes and a mischievous smile, came over and offered him a Band-Aid he had in his backpack. From that day forward, they were inseparable. They rode bikes together. After school, weaving through alleys and racing down cracked sidewalks. On summer evenings, they played basketball on the rusted hoop nailed to a telephone pole. They traded baseball cards, shared snacks, even plotted how they'd become famous. One day, Michael wanted to be a lawyer. Daryl wanted to build things, cars, bridges, anything he could take apart and put back together. But even at that young age, the differences in their lives were there, quiet, subtle, but growing. Michael's parents were strict but loving. His mother, a schoolteacher, made him do his homework at the kitchen table every night. His father, a warehouse supervisor, taught him to shake hands firmly and always look people in the eye. They didn't have much, but they had structure. They had rules. They had dreams for their son. Daryl's home was different. His mother worked 2 jobs, often coming home long after he was in bed. His father had left when Daryl was 6 and never came back. He had no curfews, no supervision, and no one checking if he did his homework. Sometimes he came to school hungry. Other times, he didn't come at all. By middle school, the cracks in their friendship began to show. Michael started spending more time in honors classes, student council meetings, and reading clubs. Daryl, meanwhile, was getting into fights, skipping class, and hanging around with older boys who already had gang tattoos and hard eyes. Still, when they saw each other on the block, there was always a nod, a "what's up?" a flicker of the old bond. But it was clear they were on different paths. High school was the turning point. Michael got a scholarship to a magnet school across town. Daryl stayed at the neighborhood school, where teachers were outnumbered by security guards, and metal detectors greeted students at the front door. They rarely saw each other after that. Michael graduated with honors, went to college, then law school. He worked hard, rose through the ranks, and eventually earned the black robe he now wore as Judge Michael Owens. Daryl? No one really knew what had happened to him. Some said he left town. Others heard whispers, jail time, jobs here and there, maybe trouble with drugs. He had become just another lost name in the neighborhood's long list of forgotten boys. And then, 30 years later, they were face to face again, in the most unthinkable place. A courtroom. Michael had taken his seat on the bench like he did every morning, going over case files, sipping his coffee, preparing for a long day. When the bailiff announced the next case, State versus Daryl Jenkins, he hadn't thought twice. But the moment the defendant stood, everything changed. Time froze. There he was. Older, rougher, with lines etched deep into his face and pain behind his eyes, but unmistakably him. The same Daryl Jenkins who once stayed up all night, helping him fix a broken science project. The same Daryl who punched a bully in the nose for making fun of Michael's stutter. The same boy who, for a few golden years, had been more like a brother than a friend. And now he stood in front of him, accused of armed robbery and assault, facing 15 years in prison. The irony, the tragedy, the sheer weight of it hit Michael like a punch to the chest. How had they ended up here? 2 boys, 1 street, 1 friendship, 2 futures that had diverged so far they could barely see each other anymore. And yet, here they were, drawn back together not by choice, but by fate. As Michael looked into Daryl's eyes, he realized something profound. This wasn't just another case. This wasn't just another defendant. This was a reflection of a different life he could have lived. A reminder of how thin the line really was between success and survival in neighborhoods like theirs. And maybe, just maybe, was a second chance for both of them. "Your Honor, is everything all right?" the prosecutor asked cautiously. Judge Michael Owens blinked, snapping back to the present. For a moment, the courtroom had blurred around him, swallowed by the sudden rush of memory. He looked up at the young attorney, then at the jury, then, most reluctantly, back at the defendant. "Yes, sorry," he muttered, adjusting his robe and clearing his throat. "Let's proceed." But something inside him had shifted. As testimony resumed, Michael tried to focus. He jotted notes, nodded where appropriate, and asked procedural questions when needed. But his mind kept drifting, back to summer afternoons on Lincoln Avenue, back to laughter echoing through alleyways, back to Daryl Jenkins as a kid with dreams in his eyes. Now, that same Daryl sat just feet away, hunched, beside his public defender. He hadn't said a word during the proceedings. His hands rested motionless on the table. He didn't meet Michael's eyes, not once. Was it embarrassment? Shame? Or something heavier? Resignation? Michael couldn't tell. But the silence between them was deafening. By the time the court adjourned for the day, the sun was dipping behind the courthouse windows. The bailiff had packed up. The attorneys had left. The janitor made quiet rounds in the hallway outside. But Judge Owens remained. He sat alone in his chambers, surrounded by shelves of legal books and the ticking of an old brass clock. A cold cup of coffee sat untouched beside him as he opened his laptop and pulled up Daryl's file. He braced himself and began to read. The criminal record was long, but not unusual for someone from their old neighborhood. A marijuana possession charge at 21. Petty theft at 23. A domestic disturbance call at 27. No charges filed. Then a series of gaps, followed by a string of minor offenses in his 30s. Trespassing, loitering, disorderly conduct, and now, at 42, the most serious charge yet, armed robbery and assault with a deadly weapon. But something didn't sit right. The police report stated that Daryl had been present at a liquor store robbery. 2 masked men had stormed the place. One had a gun. The store clerk was pistol-whipped, and the register emptied. The security footage showed Daryl entering the store with one of the men, but not holding a weapon, not threatening anyone. When the cops arrived, Daryl didn't run. He stayed on the scene, hands up. He claimed he didn't know it was a robbery, that he thought he was just going to the store with a friend, that he tried to back out once he realized what was happening, but witnesses were shaky. His record didn't help, and his so-called friend, the man seen wielding the gun, had disappeared. Michael leaned back in his chair and sighed. Something in his gut told him Daryl was telling the truth, but was that instinct or memory? He stood up and began pacing. He couldn't stop thinking about the Daryl he once knew, the boy who stayed late to help neighbors fix their bikes, who rescued a stray dog and hid it in his closet for a week, who once gave Michael his lunch money after a bully stole his. That Daryl didn't seem like someone who would point a gun at a clerk, and yet, 30 years had passed. People change. Life changes them. Michael opened the file again and clicked on the statement from the store clerk. The guy with the gun hit me. The other guy? I'm not sure. He looked scared. He kept saying we should leave. I don't think he was in charge. That line stuck with him. He rubbed his temples, torn. Judges weren't supposed to get personal. Emotion clouded judgment. But this didn't feel like emotion. It felt like justice. Nagging at him, he looked at Daryl's last known employer, a janitorial service. He'd worked there on and off for 2 years before the arrest. His supervisor noted him as quiet, punctual, reliable. Not exactly the profile of a hardened criminal. Michael glanced at the clock. 10:41 p.m. He sat back down and wrote a note for himself. Have defense explore character witnesses. Look deeper into co-defendant. Request timeline of day's events. He paused, then added one more line. Ask Daryl what really happened. This wasn't just about evidence anymore. It was about truth, about history, about the razor-thin line between 2 kids who once played ball together and where life eventually led them. And as he shut down his computer and turned off the lights, Michael Owens knew one thing for certain. This trial was far from over, and it might not just determine Daryl's future, but his own conscience as well. A quiet conversation that changed everything the next day in court. As attorneys shuffled papers and jurors filed out for recess, Judge Michael Owens did something rare, something controversial, something he knew could raise eyebrows if word got out. That he requested a private meeting with the defendant. Off the record, his clerk hesitated. Sir, are you sure? I am, Michael said quietly. This won't be part of the proceedings. No notes, no decisions, just a conversation. Minutes later, Michael found himself in a small holding room behind the courtroom. The walls were bare except for a clock ticking softly above the door. A metal table sat in the center, with 2 plastic chairs on either side. It felt more like an interrogation room than a place for an old reunion. Daryl was already inside, wrists cuffed loosely in front of him. He looked up as Michael entered, a mixture of confusion and curiosity on his face. That a bailiff stood by the door but kept his distance. Michael sat down across from his old friend. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Just two men, facing each other across decades of time and pain. Michael broke the silence. "You remember me?" Daryl nodded slowly, his eyes misting. "Of course I do, Mike. Lincoln Avenue. The bikes. The basketball court with the bent rim." Michael smiled faintly. "You always had the better jump shot. You always had the better grades." They both chuckled, softly, briefly. But the laughter faded quickly. "What happened to you?" Michael asked, his voice steady but gentle. Daryl leaned back in his chair, looking up at the ceiling like the answer might be written there. Then he looked down at his hands. "Life happened," he said. "That's the simple version." Michael waited. "I tried to do good," Daryl continued. "After high school, I got a job cleaning buildings. Nothing fancy, but it paid. I stayed out of trouble for a long time. Met someone. Got married. Had a daughter." Michael's eyebrows lifted slightly. This was all new to him. "She's 10 now," Daryl said, his voice softening. "Smart. Like you were. Reads all the time. What about your wife?" Daryl looked away. "She got sick a couple years ago. Cancer. No insurance. Bills stacked up fast. I was working nights, weekends, anything I could find. But it wasn't enough." He paused, swallowed hard. "I started making deals I shouldn't have. Some side jobs for quick money. Nothing violent, just fast cash. Until one day a guy I knew said we were just going to scope out a place. Told me no one would get hurt. I swear, Mike, I thought I was just the lookout." Michael leaned forward slightly, searching Daryl's face. "And when it went bad?" "I froze," Daryl said. "The guy had a gun. I didn't even know he brought one. I told him to stop, told him we should go. But he panicked. Hit the clerk. I didn't lay a finger on anyone. But when the cops came, I was still there." Silence filled the room again. Michael could see the weight Daryl was carrying. It wasn't just the charges, it was everything. The sick wife, the lost jobs, the impossible choices. That he wasn't trying to excuse him. He wasn't looking to save an old friend from consequences. But sitting across from Daryl, Michael saw the truth that courtrooms often ignored. That sometimes, life didn't hand out villains, it handed out survivors. Some made it through. Others didn't. "I'm not asking for special treatment," Daryl said quietly. "I know what I did. I know I messed up. I don't want my daughter growing up thinking I'm some monster." Michael nodded slowly. "You still in touch with her?" "Yeah. She writes me letters. I write back when I can. I send drawings. She still thinks I'm a superhero." Michael's heart sank. The bailiff cleared his throat softly. Signaling time was up, Michael stood, his black robe trailing slightly behind him. "I can't promise anything, Daryl," he said, voice tight with emotion. "But I'll make sure. The truth is heard. No shortcuts. No assumptions. You deserve that much." Daryl nodded. "That's all I want." As Michael stepped out of the holding room and back into the judge's chambers, he felt the weight of something more than a case. It was a life, one that once ran parallel to his own, now veering back into view at a critical moment. And it was in that quiet conversation, not in a courtroom, not in front of a jury, that everything began to change. Not just for Daryl, but for Judge Michael Owens too. The verdict that shocked the room back in the courtroom, tension hung in the air like smoke. The jury had been out for hours, deliberating behind closed doors. Every tick of the clock echoed louder. The spectators whispered, the attorneys paced, and Daryl Jenkins sat still, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. Judge Owens tried to keep his focus on the bench in front of him, but his thoughts drifted again to their conversation the day before. The quiet admission, the regret. The worn-down man who once dreamed of building bridges, now hoping for one more shot at redemption. Finally, the clerk stood. "The jury has reached a verdict." Everyone in the room froze. The jury re-entered, solemn and focused, their faces unreadable. The foreman handed a folded slip of paper to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Michael unfolded it slowly, reading the words to himself before handing it back. He looked up. "In the case of State versus Daryl Jenkins, on the charges of armed robbery and assault with a deadly weapon," a breathless pause, "we find the defendant not guilty." A collective gasp swept across the room. Murmurs rose. The defense attorney's shoulders slumped in relief. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard. Even the bailiff's expression flickered with surprise. Michael held up a hand, quieting the room. On the charges of trespassing and unlawful entry. Guilty, the foreman said, at a far lesser charge. One that wouldn't carry prison time, but might mean probation or community service. Daryl let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. He closed his eyes for a second, as if trying to make sure this wasn't a dream. Then he looked up, finally, directly at Michael. His eyes were glassy, his lips trembling with quiet gratitude. Judge Owens kept his face composed, the way judges are trained to do. But inside, he felt a mix of relief, compassion, and something else. Hope. He tapped his gavel once, then addressed the courtroom. Mr. Jenkins, while the jury has found you not guilty on the more serious charges, you are not walking away without responsibility. Trespassing is a crime. You knowingly entered a space during a criminal act. That matters. Daryl nodded. Yes, Your Honor. However, Michael continued, this court recognizes something deeper: context. A man's entire life cannot be summed up by a single moment or a sheet of charges. Sometimes, justice means understanding. And sometimes, it means mercy. He paused, letting his words settle over the room. You've been given a second shot, Mr. Jenkins. Don't waste it. The system doesn't give many. Daryl stood straighter, the weight on his shoulders just a little lighter. I won't, he said, voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Mike. I mean, Your Honor. Michael gave a faint smile. Court is adjourned. He banged the gavel. But this time, the silence that followed wasn't from shock, it was from respect. As people began to file out of the courtroom, many glanced at Daryl, not with judgment, but with something gentler. Understanding, maybe. Sympathy. Or simply awe that, in a justice system so often cold and calculated, something human had just happened. Michael remained seated for a moment longer. He watched as Daryl was uncuffed and let out, not as a free man entirely, but no longer a condemned one. As the doors swung shut behind him, Michael leaned back in his chair. He thought of the cracked sidewalks of Lincoln Avenue, the rusty basketball hoop, the two boys who once thought the world was theirs. They'd taken different roads. Michael's was paved with structure, guidance, and luck. Daryl's was full of potholes and wrong turns. But somehow, miraculously, their paths had crossed again. And maybe, just maybe, this time the outcome would be different. Sometimes, life puts people on very different roads, some filled with opportunity, others filled with obstacles. But every once in a while, fate brings those roads back together, even if just for a moment. And in that moment, what we choose to do can change everything. What would you do if you were the judge? Would you have given Daryl a second chance? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories that will leave you speechless. Movie Camera, thanks for watching. Until next time, stay curious.